Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. I want to welcome our guests in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's subject is a very special subject, another very special subject, the crisis in Western Sahara, which has been, way off the map of consciousness for the vast majority of folk on the planet, including those of us who are well informed around human rights issues. We have two very special guests to discuss this issue with us. One is Catherine Constantinides, and if I'm mispronouncing her name, I welcome a correction. She's a South African thought leader, environmental and social justice activist, and the other is Bill Fletcher, Jr., former president of TransAfrica Forum. He's also a labor and international activist. Let me begin with a little bit of background on Catherine. She has a very extensive resume. I'm just going to share those parts of the resume that are most relevant to today's broadcast. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to share the entire resume of both of our guests with the write-up that we do later on today's broadcast. But Catherine is a 2013 Archbishop Tutu African Oxford Fellow and 2016 Mandela Washington Fellow. Catherine's commitment and passion for social justice takes her from the smallest of communities in South Africa to global platforms, including the United Nations and global forums and platforms the world over. She currently works as a human rights defender, actively engaged in Geneva at the UN Human Rights Council for the world's most marginalized and vulnerable peoples. Catherine's recent work on the issue of the self-determination for the people of Western Sahara has seen her engaged on the ground in the Sahrawi refugee camps in North Africa, as well as with political leadership across the continent and around the world, to highlight the conflict and lack of political will to address one of the longest outstanding issues on the UN Security Council agenda. Our good brother Bill Fletcher has been an activist since his teen years. Upon graduating from college, he went to work as a welder in a shipyard, thereby entering the labor movement. Over the years, he has been active in workplace and community struggles as well as electoral campaigns. He has worked for several labor unions in addition to serving as a senior staff person in the national AFL-CIO. Bill is the former president of TransAfrica Forum, a senior scholar with the Institute for Policy Studies, and in the leadership of several other projects. I want to welcome both of these honored guests to today's conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. Welcome to you both. Peace be unto you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, my brother. Why don't we begin?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having us.
Wa alaikum salam, Catherine, and good to have both of you. Catherine, I've heard a lot of good things about you, a lot of good things. And I couldn't wait to have this conversation with you. In fact, I had indicated to Brother Ponte at Salam Media 2 or 3 months ago that I wanted to have you on as a guest and to talk about this issue. And my brother Bill here He and I, we go way back. If I'm not mistaken, Bill, you succeeded the late Randall Robinson as president of TransAfrica Forum, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, Randall's still alive. I succeeded.
Oh, Randall is still alive?
Yeah.
As far as I know.
He relocated to St. Kitts.
Okay.
In the Caribbean. But yes, I took over after he retired. I was there from 2002 to about the middle of 2006.
Well, bless his heart. I don't know where I got it from that he had passed on, but or maybe it might have been his brother. Is his brother still with us?
Max Robinson.
Okay, Max Robinson passed away.
Passed away, yeah.
Okay, all right. So I got the two mixed up.
Right.
Anyway, so you were the successor to Randall, and you both did, a tremendous job during the American part of that anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. And I just want to take this moment to recognize you for those who don't know your background.
Thank you.
Who you are, what you've been doing. So again, we have two very special guests today, and I can't wait to get into the subject matter that we have on hand. What I want to do before going to the first question, I got a little piece of video that we pulled out from our good friends at Democracy Now! Back in 2016, for the edification of our viewers and listeners, Democracy Now! Was in Morocco was in North Africa. I'm not sure exactly where they were, but they were in North Africa for a UN forum. It was a very important UN forum, and they took a chance on attempting, and they did successfully break the media blackout around the crisis that was still raging at that time. And they were able to enter Western Sahara for 4 days. And she ended up doing a special broadcast in 2016, and then they re-aired it this past November after the thank goodness they're gone Trump administration decided to recognize the annexation of Western Sahara as a gift, I guess, as a thank you to Morocco for normalizing ties with the apartheid Zionist state of Israel. So I decided that it would be good to show just a little snatch of this. It was close to an hour broadcast that Democracy Now! Did. And inshallah ta'ala, we're going to share the link to the entire broadcast along with the link to this one after this program has ended. So, Brother Sadiq, if you can hear me, go ahead and show that that piece of footage now.
President Gerald Ford, he hoped for a, quote, rigged UN vote at the Security Council to confirm Morocco's claim over Western Sahara. About half of the Sahrawi population fled the invasion to neighboring Algeria, where they settled in refugee camps in the middle of the desert. The Moroccan invasion set off a 16-year-long war with the Sahrawi liberation movement known as the Polisario Front. Morocco's army, with the help of U.S. military aid, drove the Polisario to Western Sahara's eastern desert. Morocco then created the world's longest minefield and built the second longest wall on Earth with the help of U.S. weapons companies Northrop and Westinghouse. The nearly 1,700-mile wall divides Sahrawis who remain under occupation from those who fled into exile. The Moroccan government began decades of torture, disappearances, killings, and repression against pro-independence Sahrawis living in the occupied territory. In 1991, the UN sponsored a ceasefire and promised Sahrawis a referendum on self-determination, organized by its peacekeeping mission known as MINURSO. Since then, Morocco has blocked attempts to organize the vote, and the UN Security Council has refused to implement its own referendum plan or allow MINURSO to monitor the human rights situation in the territory. And the international media has largely ignored the occupation, in part because Morocco has routinely blocked journalists from entering Western Sahara. But in late 2016, Democracy Now! Successfully broke the news blockade. We were in Marrakesh, Morocco, for the United Nations Climate Change Conference. With UN credentials and US passports, we decided to take a chance and attempt to do what no foreign television crew has done in years: report from Africa's last colony.
Goodman, this is Democracy Now! We've just landed in Laayoune, the capital of Western Sahara, Africa's last colony, hoping to report from here, occupied by Morocco for more than 40 years. We're at the airport now. We'll see what happens.
I'm speaking quietly on the plane because journalists, even Western journalists, are rarely allowed into Western Sahara. We don't know if this is the moment we'll be turned back, as so many others have been. Maybe it's the UN press badges around our necks. Maybe it's our US passports. Or maybe it's just that our arrival was so unexpected. But after a check of our documents and a few questions, we're waved through customs. Outside the airport, we climb into a car driven by Jamal, our translator and guide.
They were very nice to meet.
So who are the plainclothes officers at the airport?
Those are security officers. Some of them belong to different departments.
Jamal says we've been observed by local police, the Moroccan Secret Service, and intelligence agents.
So welcome to Laayoune. This is Laayoune. Actually, the airport is so close, so nearby that you can walk.
We arrive at the Hotel Saalakhan, knowing that the receptionist is obliged to inform the police of our presence. We check in quickly and immediately prepare to interview Sahrawi activists in one of our rooms. We don't know how many hours or minutes will.
Okay, we're back. Okay, welcome back. The first question I wanted to begin with, and ladies first in order of response. How did you both become aware of the crisis in Western Sahara, and what made you decide to become involved? And lastly, it's a three-part question. Why is it important that the global community know about this crisis? So it's a three-part question. You first, Catherine.
So thank you so much for the question. I think one day, inshallah, I will write a book just on how I got involved in Western Sahara. It was on the invitation from the king to attend and address a conference that was being hosted in Dakhla. At the time the invitation came, it said it was for a conference in Dakhla in Morocco. And I must be honest, I was not very interested to go to a conference being hosted in Morocco in the first place. But to cut a long story short, when I started to really dig into where was Dakhla, I put out on social media, has anyone been to Dakhla? Does anyone know where Dakhla is? And as I started to search on social media, I got more and more confused because Dakhla was in Western Sahara. In some places it said it was in southern Morocco. And so the confusion really intrigued me. And I thought, no, but something doesn't fit. Something really doesn't work out. So I would attend the conference and I'd go and do my own investigation. But needless to say, before I even got to go to the conference, I got a call from the South African presidency. And on the Friday, just before I was supposed to leave, I received a call saying that the South African presidency would ask that I do not attend the conference, and in fact that I boycott the conference. I'm just a simple person that was asked to speak at a conference, and now the presidency is asking me to boycott this very conference. Within the next 12 hours, I got an email from the African Union requesting for me to also boycott this conference. And I then got a call from a gentleman who I will never forget. He phoned me and he said, "My name is Ambassador Mohammed. I'm calling you on behalf of the people of Western Sahara. We have heard of the invitation. We have heard that you have declined the invitation, but we ask you to come and see us in the Sahrawi refugee camps." And really, to keep this very short, they asked me to go to the refugee camps on my own account. They obviously could not pay for me to go, but they really wanted me to see what was going on. At this time, I was more and more confused. There was very little literature that I understood in English, because some of it was coming from a place, you know, it was put out on social media from a Moroccan perspective. There was so much confusion. I could not sleep. I could not do anything except try and search more and more. And the more I searched, the more confused I was. So I begged, stealed, and borrowed the money. I went and spent time in the Sahrawi refugee camps. And I remember getting onto a military plane, leaving the refugee camps. And as I walked, I felt like I was in a movie. It was a military plane that you walked on the back of the plane. I'd never seen one of these planes before, let alone been on one. And as I got onto that flight and I sat in this very, very cold metal bird, I sat and I looked outside of the very little window, and I thought to myself, I don't know why I've come here. I don't know why Ambassador Mohammed found me. But what I do know is that God has a greater purpose, and I can never forget what I've seen. I can never forget the stories I've been told, and I don't know what it is, but I know that I have to use every platform available to me to talk about the Sahrawi people and the conflict of Western Sahara. As a child born in a democratic South Africa, a child born in a country that so many people around the world, Bill Fletcher included, who fought for the democracy that I live in, a child that is born of this continent, how is it that we did not know about Western Sahara? Yet we have policy that is so powerful and so strong in support of the Sahrawi people. And so as I left the camps after that very first visit, what I did not imagine would happen is that years later, my life would unfold in a way that I would become Sahrawi. The Sahrawi people are my people. They are my second nation, and I will do everything and anything that it takes to ensure that in my lifetime, the Sahrawi people return home to a free and democratic Western Sahara. It is unthinkable that in this day and age, the Sahrawi people have been completely forgotten. I sit on platforms and in places and spaces I could not have imagined, representing a people that have put immense hope in me. And as somebody who respects the Sahrawi people as my own people, I cannot live a moment without doing all that I can for them. And I think it's important that the world notices Western Sahara, that Africa specifically, as we fight to build our continent. South Africa, people ask me, South Africa is so full of its own challenges. Why am I not focusing on those? And I assure you I am. But as somebody who is a visionary and looks forward, South Africa will only be as strong as its weakest link from a continental perspective. And right now, the forgotten people of Western Sahara are certainly the weakest link of our continent. They are the last colony in Africa, and they are being colonized. They are being tormented daily by the violations of their human rights. And we cannot forget them. We cannot only speak about Western Sahara when we're making a very fancy address at the African Union, or when we're passing some kind of literature and some kind of paperwork that requires us to mention those that we stand in solidarity with. We need far more than those very fancy documents. We need action, and we need political will.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Well said. And in fact, one of those videos that you were in that tortured part of the world was my first introduction to you.
Wow.
Bill, what say you, brother? How did you become involved? How did you become aware of the crisis in Western Sahara? And what was it that made you decide to become involved in this campaign?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the program, and finding out that I'm on the same program with Catherine makes it a special delight. My involvement is far less dramatic, or at least the origin of it. And in some ways, I'm just to spend a little bit of time on that. I want to actually jump to the end of the story. My involvement goes back to the 1970s when I started reading about, I was following different national liberation movements, and I started reading about this national liberation movement that was fighting a war on very armed jeeps going through the desert. And I said, wow, like, what's this about? And then that took me into the actual dynamics of what's going on in the Western Sahara. But the Western Sahara remained largely off the screen for most people in the United States. It still is. But I remained interested. When I was running TransAfrica Forum, one of the things for which I'm very self-critical is that I did not spend time focusing on the Western Sahara. And that was a mistake on my part. But over time, in order to try to rectify that, I started trying to think through how could a movement actually be built in the United States. So 2 points in the interest of brevity. One is, why is this important? And then the second is, at least in the United States, the question of what do we do? It's important for all of the reasons that Catherine delineated. But I would add another one. That there is the absolute possibility of a regional war, and a regional war could end up dragging in a variety of different players, both state actors and non-state actors, and so you have as of November, the ceasefire between Morocco and the Frente Polisario broke down because of violations by the Moroccans. So war is back, and you have a hostile relationship between Morocco and Algeria that goes back at least to 1962, when Morocco invaded the newly independent Algeria. You have hostility between Morocco and Mauritania. Morocco has these claims for what they call Greater Morocco, which includes part of Algeria, all of the Western Sahara, most of Mauritania, and part of Mali. And then you have non-state actors like Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb and Daesh, or ISIS. So you have a situation where if this does not get resolved, a number of these players could get dragged into a regional war, and it could expand to bringing or involving Spain and France, France being the principal external backer of the Moroccan royalty. So I think that there's a real priority in addressing this conflict. And one of the problems in the United States is that the Western Sahara rarely gets on our screen. That changed when Donald Trump did something completely cynical in recognizing the Moroccan occupation of the Western Sahara. And so greater attention came to be on that. But in the larger community, despite that, you still have a failure of many people, including political officials, to pay attention to what's going on in the Western Sahara. And among African Americans, US African Americans, part of my concern is that we mobilized around Portuguese colonies in Africa against white minority rule in Southern Africa. But when the conflicts took a different turn that was away from a traditional racial framework, we have been largely unable or unwilling to respond. We did not seem to know how to respond to the Rwanda genocide with some notable exceptions, like my predecessor at TransAfrica, Randall Robinson. And looking at what's going on in Morocco, there is this failure of even some of our best leaders to recognize that this is a situation of an illegal occupation, and this occupation needs to be ended. And yes, it's two African populations, but so what? One is on the right side and one is on the wrong side.
That's right. Yeah. Catherine, as I mentioned earlier, my introduction to you was through some video I saw of you when you were in the camps. You were there on the ground, and much of what I saw was riveting and very disturbing. This roughly 1 hour special report that Democracy Now! Did and re-aired in November, this past November. I don't know if the two of you, if you saw that, but that too was very, very disturbing, very disturbing. I mean, one of the things that stood out for me and watching especially the video of from Democracy Now! Was the courage that the Sahrawi people, especially the women, the courage they demonstrated in, going out into the streets, knowing what the consequence was going to be, the brutal beatings, the terrible violations committed against their persons. I mean, terrible violations. But they saw it as, I mean, when they heard that this Western team of reporters had been able to come in to the country, they felt that it was their duty, no matter the danger, to demonstrate, to do as much as they possibly could to meet them, knowing that, from the time that Amy Goodman and her team got off the plane, they were being followed. They were being tailed by, folks who were part of the security establishment. And attempts were made to intimidate them repeatedly. And also those who were willing to come to them and to give them eyewitness testimonies, eyewitness reports. It was, I mean, some of the stuff that you saw, and it was really terrible. And it was, if for me, us being able to see what little we were able to see in that, from what Goodman and her team did, one could only imagine the horrors that take place in the shadows. Catherine, what did you see? What did you experience during that period when you first entered the camps? And were these refugee camps outside of Western Sahara, or were these camps, most of the camps, within Western Sahara?
So firstly, just to say, the refugee camps are in southwest Algeria, and so they are completely outside of Western Sahara. And the unfortunate thing is that because of my vocal approach on the issue, I am not allowed to access Western Sahara and the actual occupied territory, which is fine, because I will go to the occupied territory when it is free and when it belongs to the rightful people of Western Sahara. However, the refugee camps, one's got to understand, these were set up as temporary refugee camps in 1975. When I entered the camps, you travel by night, and so I probably arrived at about 3 a.m. And when I was driven from the airport, quite a long journey. I mean, the journey was nearly 2 days to get from South Africa to get to the refugee camps. And when you enter the refugee camps, I will never, ever forget, and this will be in my book as well one day, I will never forget the darkness of the Saharan desert, small flickering of light coming from across the desert as far as your eye could see. But the light is so faint and so gentle that you cannot help but to inquire what that light is, because you can see nothing else. It is so dark. There's no electricity in the refugee camps. And at that time, I remember entering the camps. It's also 3 a.m. in the morning. I was taken to the tent and the family where I would stay. And being so late or so early in the morning, 3 a.m., I was welcomed by a family of about 8 or 9 people who had waited up all night for me. And it was, nobody spoke English. Hello was not even a word that people understood or knew. They spoke absolutely no English. And so there was a language barrier. But what I can tell you is the family that I stayed with and the family that became my family, I will never forget how warm they were, how welcoming they were. They treated me as if I was a lost cousin that they hadn't seen for decades. They welcomed me into their home. And I remember falling asleep because now I had traveled for about 48 hours. And I will never forget, as I fell asleep, probably for only about an hour or so, they then woke me up and had prepared dinner. And I woke up and I ate a meal with them. It was now about 4:30. So dinner was almost like breakfast. And I went off to sleep again. But that morning at about 8 o'clock, when I started to wake up, it was freezing cold. It is the desert. So in the early morning, for quite a while, it is freezing cold. And what I remember is waking up. And when I looked out of the tent and out into the desert, I will never forget how stark white that desert was. It almost hurt your eyes to look out because the sun kind of reflects against that whiteness. And the only thing that I could see was the bright light of the woman that just covered the camps. The strength of the Sahrawi woman, you have aptly put it, their strength is, it's unfathomable. You cannot understand how strong these women are. What I did not know at the time was that I would continue to work with Sahrawi women in the refugee camps, in women from the occupied territory, where I work with them in Geneva, in Paris, in different parts of the world, where we go to lobby government, go to lobby UN sessions. But the Sahrawi women carry a strength, and you understand that strength. And on days that I've battled to carry on, I think of Sahrawi women. I think of the women that have been tortured by the Moroccan regime, women that have been taken and have been victims of torture, not just for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, but 12 years at a time. They come out of that torture and they continue to get up every single day to fight for their people. They are examples and reminders of the strength of the human spirit, the strength to carry on and have purpose. And for me, the strength of the Sahrawi woman alone is a story of why we as individuals and as human beings need to fight, why we need to find that strength deep inside of us every single day, and that conviction to carry on fighting for something. They are fighting for their self-determination, and they stop at nothing. They are not scared to be at the forefront of terror, of torture, of absolutely unthinkable physical harm at the hands of the Moroccan regime, most especially the Sahrawi woman in the occupied territory. Those in the refugee camps are safe. However, they live with less than nothing. So you have a people who have been divided geographically and physically by the berm and the wall, which we saw in that brief piece from Democracy Now! So that wall divides an entire nation of people. But what we don't understand is that that division allows people to live in a city that is somewhat modernized or has moved with the times, but is occupied and is under occupation and colonization. And they are under unbelievable attack just for being who they are every single day. And then on the other side, you have Sahrawis in the refugee camps, which are sitting in temporary refugee camps, set up in 1975. In 1991, 30 years ago, there was a promise of a referendum that has never seen the light of day. But these people have been left in 1975. in an era and a time where they have not been able to progress, if they start to progress, unfortunately, we're finding ourselves in a situation where if they look like they are able to continue living in those refugee camps, food aid is then portioned or stopped. Their access to safe, clean drinking water will cease to exist. And the aid that they receive as refugees will cease to continue to allow them to merely continue living. And so they cannot actually start up enterprises. They cannot set up jobs. The location of the refugee camps, yes, they are safe and nothing happened. I feel more safe in the refugee camps than I do here in South Africa, unfortunately. But they have less than nothing. They live in a way that is unthinkable. It pains me the way that they live. They have no access to safe, clean drinking water. The climatic conditions are extremely harsh. A few days ago, I was speaking to my Sahrawi family in the camps. It's about 45 degrees Celsius currently, being the middle of summer. They cannot grow their own food. Yes, there are incredible aquaponic projects and different things that we're trying to, that different Sahrawis are trying to set up, and they're making remarkable success, but it is very small scale. And it is unbelievable to think that Sahrawis are currently living under such conditions 47 years later, and it is not right. It really, really is not right. Even though they are not pained by occupation and living under Moroccan rule, they're living with less than nothing, and they continue to be pained by this kind of inhumane manner where the world has forgotten that they too deserve their human rights and dignity.
Bill, the political establishment internationally is... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I just want to add a little bit of historical context to what Catherine was laying out.
Go ahead.
Because it was very, very important what she was laying out. But then I just saw someone write something about what they alleged to be historical Morocco. What's important, I think, for folks to understand is that Spain grabbed this territory in the 19th century and held it until 1975. And during that time, a society developed within those borders, much like Eritreans developed within territory that was controlled by Italy from the 1800s on. And so you had a population that may have had some relationship to Morocco at some point, but there's sufficient documentation that Morocco never controlled the Western Sahara. This was established in the 1970s and again reaffirmed in the 1990s. And so when people want to talk about historical Morocco, then let's talk about historical Carthage. Why don't we just restart the Carthaginian Empire? And that resolves the whole matter, right? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous on some level. The reality is that there's a people there that were colonized by the Spanish who have demanded the right of national self-determination, which the United Nations promised. And the United Nations did not follow through, as Catherine was pointing out. It did not follow through. And so you ended up having a demand for freedom that ultimately took the form of a war. The idea that Morocco can lay claim to this or lay claim to part of Algeria or lay claim to Mauritania is, frankly, in these days, absurd. It's not going to happen. Now, maybe in the early 1960s, when the Organization of African Unity was formed, maybe the discussion really should have been about establishing new borders. And in my opinion, unfortunately, that was not done in terms of establishing new borders within Africa. But once a decision was made, these borders are there, and the people in those territories have the right to make a determination. If ultimately they're going to decide that they might want to have a relationship, that's up to the people, the Sahrawis themselves. It's not up to the Moroccans to say, we're going to do this. But the other part of this is to understand what happened in 1975. The King Hassan II, in an opportunistic move, brought hundreds of thousands of Moroccan civilians and soldiers to the border and marched them into the Western Sahara in violation of international law. And so when Catherine was talking about these refugee camps were not the result of some abstraction. There was an absolute invasion of the Western Sahara, and people had to flee. And so that's a situation that we're dealing with.
Now, on the issue of this situation and the UN and other international actors, we know that when it comes to many major human rights issues of our time, in fact, going back to the origins of the United Nations as an international body supposedly erected for the purpose of ensuring that we would not continue to have the kind of wars that we've been having. We know that when it comes to certain issues, the United Nations is a paper tiger, and it's because of the dominance that certain countries have who are permanent members of the Security Council, the veto authority that they have over issues. One of the things that I found disturbing the more I looked into this issue of Western Sahara is the fact that while it has been completely off the radar of probably 99.9% of the people on this planet, big players within government internationally are well aware of it. And right here in our own backyard, Bill, successive presidential administrations, Democrat and Republican, have been facilitators of Morocco's brutal occupation. President Carter, Nixon, Ford, Bush, Clinton, Obama. I mean, all the way up to Trump, and what Trump then decided to do as a thank you note for this Morocco recognizing Israel. It has been a bipartisan shame across administrations. Why do you think that is? Is it simply because of the natural wealth that the country is reportedly has, and both underground as well as in the sea, its waters? I mean, is it just that? Is there something strategic about its location, or what do you think it is?
I think that there's a couple of factors, and both are very, very important. So Morocco has been a key strategic ally of different United States administrations throughout the period of the Cold War. And it is situated, it's an ally also of France. In fact, I would argue it's a neo-colony of France. Yeah. And so it's situated in such a place, literally and geographically, that is of key importance. But it also has been a country that the United States has been able to utilize in its efforts against left-wing forces, against jihadists and others. So that's one issue. And the other part of that is that Morocco and Israel have had a long-term semi-covert relationship, at least going back to the 1960s, when their various intelligence apparatuses would collaborate. So that's one thing. The other thing that affects us is that there is precious little in the way of a constituency in the United States that is making it difficult for any administration on this matter. So most administrations do not feel like they're going to feel any sting by failing to address the situation and they feel no pressure to push the United Nations. And it's important to keep in mind the United States, as Catherine pointed out, the United States was partially complicit in the Moroccan invasion in 1975 in providing varying kinds of support. By coincidence, 1975 was also the year that Indonesia invaded East Timor, also with the support of the United States. So, so the United States is not an honest broker in this situation and has been prepared to just tolerate a situation, assuming that the Sahrawis were basically not going to do anything. And that situation is no longer the case.
Mm-hmm. And Catherine, you mentioned earlier that when after you had received the invitation to attend a conference or something that was taking place in Morocco, that you had received messages from high-ranking authorities in South Africa, not to go, to boycott. So there is clearly an awareness within the establishment, within the South African establishment, within the ANC and probably other political organizations of the crisis there, and them having or feeling the appropriate, having the appropriate feeling toward that crisis, toward the oppressive conditions that these people have been suffering with. But beyond that, beyond, you shouldn't go there, you should boycott. Have you seen anything else of substance to come from the African National Congress or any other political organization in South Africa or other political organizations in the continent relating to this crisis? Have you seen anything?
Well, it must be said that for most of the liberation movements across the continent, their support is 100% behind the Polisario and for the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. So once you bring those liberation movements together, or you have a platform where they are able to gather, to talk, etc., you understand that there's no doubt that their support is behind the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. The ANC is most certainly very supportive of the fact that Morocco is illegally occupying Western Sahara, the fact that self-determination and the referendum is the only way that we can resolve the current status quo. However, we only speak about it as South Africans. I travel, I've been privileged to travel to many parts of the world. And when people talk to me, and because of the circles and the spaces that I will engage, so many people will come to me and tell me, as students, they set up marches and they were at the forefront of denouncing the evil, dark regime that was the apartheid regime taking place in South Africa. They've never been to South Africa. They have no links to South Africa, yet they stood by making sure that they did all that they could to be an international community that showed support and solidarity for the Sahrawi people. So being a South African, knowing what the international community did for my country, how is it that we're not doing the same for a country on our very own continent? Why do we not show the outrage and anger that we show for so many other occupations in the world, so many other ills and injustices that we see around the world? So yes, I come from a country that has exceptional policy when it comes to Western Sahara. But if that is not backed by the same political will to ensure that a referendum is brought to the table, that when Morocco, who was not part of the African Union, rejoins, where are the terms and conditions? Why is it that we allow them back into the body that is supposed to put Africa's agenda forward and protect all Africans? And if Western Sahara, which it is a founding member of then the OAU and now part of the African Union, why is it that Morocco is allowed back into this forum, but with terms and conditions that don't exist? How did we make these mistakes? And these are not mistakes that happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago. These are in the short periods of time that have passed now in the past 3 years. Why have we still not brought Morocco to the table with Western Sahara, with allies or different role players from the region, from the Maghreb region, and actually discuss the issue of Western Sahara as it should be? Where are the timeframes to make sure that we are reaching certain goals so that that referendum that belongs to the Sahrawi people as an inalienable right? Why have we not made sure that doesn't matter if we support them and as liberation movements, we stand behind them? Why are we not more furious that there is a country on our continent in the year 2021 that is still not only under occupation, but is being colonized in our lifetime?
Indeed.
I want to double underline that.
Yes.
I'm just, it's really interesting to look at the situation with the African Union, because as Catherine pointed out, Morocco was allowed in. It was allowed back into the AU by an AU that had included the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic as a founding member, right?
Yeah.
And so they're allowed in. Now, in 2015, there was an effort that I know to bring before the AU that increased pressure needed to be mounted, including consideration of a global campaign to end the Moroccan occupation. And the AU took no steps, none. So on paper, they do exactly what Catherine was identifying. There's all kinds of resolutions, and people will cry crocodile tears about the situation facing the Sahrawis. But in the critical area of what are you going to do? How do you bring pressure on the Moroccan royalty around this? Nothing. And I feel like the AU has to account for that. And there needs to be pressure on AU around that, because I think it's not inexplicable. There is actually an explanation, but it is immoral. It is something that should not be tolerated.
I agree. SubhanAllah, I'm a human rights advocate here in United States of America. I'm based in the metro capital area of the nation's capital. I consider myself to be, pretty well informed and very sensitive to human rights issues in different parts of the world, but I was not aware of this issue until just a few months ago. Just a few months ago, when I saw the video that was sent to me of Catherine in the refugee camps, and then I, after seeing the video, I did some research on my own on the internet, just pulling up information, and I was flabbergasted, that this is something that has been raging for as long as it has, and it's been completely off the radar, even for quote unquote human rights advocates. I'm really...
May I please say something?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, but just to add to that, what you have just said and what Bill has also just said, when we look both at the African Union and the United Nations, when we look at the African Union, we need to also further interrogate, where does the African Union receive its money from? Who pays the bills for the African Union? Because once we start to also understand and unpack what agenda are we pushing as an African Union, we can also understand why the issue of Western Sahara remains one that is just never on the agenda. When we look at the United Nations, and we specifically the Security Council, and when we understand who the role players are there and who has a veto vote, when the issue of Western Sahara comes up, once again, we understand why it is that Western Sahara is just so easily removed. And when you start to work with Sahrawi people and with the Polisario and with the leadership of Western Sahara, you understand that these are people who are dedicated to a peaceful resolution that is owed to them by the global leaders of the world. It is not something they're fighting for that does not belong to them, but they are committed to a peaceful resolution. And so on the 13th of November, when Morocco broke that ceasefire agreement, the world still remains silent. Why? Because those in power and those who have the ability to change the status quo are the very ones that benefit from the plunder of the natural resources in Western Sahara. They benefit from Morocco having the occupation exactly how it is. And so I think it's really important that I'm so grateful to you, firstly, for dedicating a show such as this to my people. I'm grateful that Mr. Bill Fletcher has continued so passionately to look into the issue of Western Sahara and to understand it. And if we do not continue to focus on ensuring that the issue of Western Sahara remains on our own agenda, educating and sharing this information on a daily basis in our own space, we need to take this to the coffee that we have, to the lunch on a Sunday with people that don't know about it. We need to start to educate people. And what we have to understand is that we don't know what we don't know. And unfortunately, the world is so fast-paced that all we take in is what the media gives us. So we have to be the ones, as activists and human rights defenders, we need to be the ones that put this on our agenda and make sure that we're educating our communities and those around us on a daily basis. We cannot let that this is another issue that 40 years from now is still being discussed. 40 years from now, we need to talk about the kind of democratic processes that have failed in Western Sahara by the Sahrawi people. We need to have different conversations, not conversations about occupation and colonization in this day and age.
Absolutely. And as I knew would be the case, this hour has gone so fast. I want to give both of you 1 minute for a final statement. You first, Catherine. A final statement to the international community on this crisis.
I think we lost her.
We lost her, so go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay. So in the United States, we formed in January a new coalition, the Campaign to End the Moroccan Occupation of the Western Sahara. Okay. And we will soon have a website that people can reference. In the meantime, my Twitter handle is @BillFletcherJr. And my website is BillFletcherJr.com. People can reach me. The issue of national self-determination, in this case, is absolutely critical. The people of the Western Sahara want the Moroccans out. O-U-T. They want them out. They want to live their lives as they should. They want to make their decisions. And these are not decisions that can be made by the Moroccan royalty. They can't be decisions that are made based on some reference to the past. This is a people that's developed a national identity, and that is what needs to be respected. We need the U.S. government, the African Union, and other countries to step up to the plate and insist Moroccans out. Viva the Sahrawis.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, on that note, I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to thank both of my guests. Catherine, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Bill for joining us. Do you want to make a final 1 minute statement, Catherine?
I would just like to say that everyone that has listened to this broadcast, go and do your own homework. Don't just take what we say, go do your homework. Every time you see Western Sahara somewhere, observe that article, take a read, and try and keep yourself alive to what is going on. Please do follow both Dr. Bill Fletcher and myself on social media. Just enlighten yourself, have conversations, engage with us, ask questions. The Sahrawi people will return home to a free and Western Sahara in our lifetime. Thank you.
Great. I want to thank you both, and I want to thank those who tuned in live to the broadcast, whether it was via audio or video. And I want to give an extra special note of thanks to those of you who will be sharing this via the various platforms over the next few days. This has been a very important conversation that more people need to be aware of. With your help, we can accomplish that goal. With that said, I want to conclude, as I normally do, with our weekly broadcast with a verse from the Quran that is like a prayer. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati, wa tawassaw bil haqq, wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in translation, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Thank you. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.